They say you can tell a lot about a person by the way they respond when no one's watching. Gloria Jefferson never needed an audience to command respect, but this time she got one. Dozens of passengers stood idle at gate C-117, the murmur of delay updates fading beneath the hum of airport chatter. And then it happened. A uniformed agent in a navy blazer with clipped speech and carefully neutral expression leaned in toward her. Not with respect, not even with courtesy, but with protocol sharpness. "Ma'am, we'll need you to come with us." The phrase was sterile, sanitized, but it hung in the air like accusation. Gloria didn't flinch. She folded her coat as she always had, sleeves aligned, collar turned down, seams flat. Then she looked at the man and asked one simple question. On what grounds? He didn't answer directly, just gestured to the gate. People nearby began to glance up from their phones, drawn by the quiet weight of what was happening. There was no commotion, no raised voice, only silence, tension, and the quiet elegance of a woman whose life had taught her when to speak and when to wait. Gloria stood. Her blouse was sky blue silk, her trousers a deep charcoal. A slim gold band circled her right hand, a nod to a lifelong past but not forgotten. On her left wrist a Timex watch, one she still wound by hand every night. She did not rush. She did not look around for validation. She picked up her leather satchel, tucked her folded coat under her arm, and stepped forward like someone used to holding her own space in rooms not built to welcome her. People moved instinctively, as if making room for something they didn't understand but felt. That morning had begun like any other. Phoenix Sky Harbor had been noisy, dry with April heat, and filled with the usual pre-boarding announcements. Gloria had arrived early, as always, not out of anxiety, but intention. She liked to move through the world on her terms. She read every sign, checked every screen, and printed her boarding pass at home, because technology fails, but paper remembers. At the gate she had declined assistance with the same gentle finality that had settled arguments in defense boardrooms for decades. "Thank you, but I'm all right." The agent smiled. She didn't realize who she was speaking to. Most did. When pre-boarding was called for first-class passengers, Gloria stepped forward without hesitation. No cane, no delay. Her boarding pass read 1C. She placed her coat in the overhead bin. Not tossed, not crammed, laid carefully atop her bag. She eased into her seat, took out a photo from her wallet, and looked at it quietly. A young girl with bright braids and a proud grin stood beside a robotics display board. A blue ribbon pinned at the top. Her name was Brielle, Gloria's great-granddaughter, and she had just won her district's Junior Innovation Challenge in Savannah. They were awarding her at City Hall. Brielle had asked if Gigi could be there. Gloria said yes without checking her calendar. Her fingers rested on the edge of the photo when the first flight attendant appeared, offering water with a practiced smile. Gloria thanked her, folded the photo, and slipped it back into her wallet. Then came the second attendant, followed by the man in the navy blazer. She was asked to step off the plane. No explanation. "We've had a reassignment situation," he said, as if speaking to an inventory crate and not a human being. Gloria's voice remained soft but firm. "Am I being removed?" He didn't answer that directly, either. When she reached the gate, the attendant behind the counter tried to appear helpful. "We'll find you another seat. It shouldn't take long." Gloria didn't argue. She stepped to the side, took out her phone, and dialed a single number. "Ruben," she said when the call connected. "We need to review Tarmac Air's funding. Something's happened." She didn't explain. She didn't need to. On the other end of the line, a man 30 years her junior began closing files and clearing his schedule. Ruben Dillard had worked with her through government transitions, military contracts, and international development reforms. If she called, he moved. At the gate, things continued moving without her. A mother whispered to her teenage son. She didn't look like a threat. A businessman glanced from his tablet and frowned. A woman seated nearby whispered to her companion. She was in first class. That's the strange part. The questions weren't loud, but they gathered like dust behind every silent stare. Back in her seat near the window, Gloria opened a notebook. Not to sketch, not to vent, but to document. Date, time, phrases, names, facial expressions, tone. She was trained for this. Not as a lawyer, not as a politician, but as a systems engineer who had spent decades identifying where things went wrong before they failed catastrophically. This wasn't personal. It was a pattern. One she had seen before. She'd been the only black woman in a room full of white suits during early avionics contracts. She'd been spoken over by interns, and then asked to explain what went wrong after launches failed. She'd built protocols that kept aircraft from burning fuel unnecessarily, and then watched men twice her pay explain her equations on television. And still she moved with grace. Because Gloria Jefferson had never needed to yell to be heard. Back at her home, in Georgia, her daughter Lorraine had reminded her just last week. You know they don't see you when you walk in, right? They see a woman. They see age. They see a seat to shuffle. They don't see power. Gloria had smiled then, not bitterly, just knowingly. Because that's how it always starts. Until it doesn't. The man who removed her didn't know her name. The staff who watched didn't understand her presence. But by morning, their company's finance team would be combing through every line item connected to the Jefferson Family Trust, and they'd find her signature on every one. Gloria didn't plan revenge. She didn't believe in anger as a strategy. What she believed in was consequence. Measured, deliberate, and documented. Outside the airport, traffic moved as usual. Inside, the gate remained tense. One younger agent tried to offer a hotel voucher. Gloria declined. I'll make my own arrangements. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to, because even in that quiet walk down the jet bridge, even in the stillness of her seat near the window, Gloria was setting something in motion far bigger than the narrow judgment that removed her. It was the kind of quiet moment people don't usually notice. A black woman in her 70s, being inconvenienced, dismissed, reassigned, moved. Except this time, she wasn't invisible. This time, someone saw, and this time she made the call. By the time her tea cooled in a corner cafe just past security, the wheels had already begun turning. Quiet ones, slow ones, the kind that don't stop once they're in motion. All because one woman carried her coat like her dignity, intact, deliberate, and undeniable, and because someone forgot that the most powerful people in the room are usually the ones who don't need to say a word. That photo wasn't just a keepsake. It was the reason Gloria was on this flight. Brielle had asked if she would come to see her accept her award at Savannah's City Hall. She hadn't even said please, just sent a photo of the official invite with a simple message. You coming, Gigi? Gloria didn't miss moments like that. Not anymore. Not after all the years where work came first. Where she'd measured a good day by numbers met, and systems optimized, and never had time to linger at school assemblies or weekend cookouts. She looked at the photo once more, folded it neatly, and tucked it back into her wallet. A flight attendant appeared beside her, offering a water bottle with a warm smile. Can I get you anything else, Jefferson? Gloria replied, adjusting her seatbelt. No thank you. This is perfect. All right, just let me know if you need anything. It was a small kindness, but a genuine one. Gloria appreciated that. The boarding continued around her, passengers dragging bags through narrow aisles, overhead bins opening and shutting like mouthfuls of conversation. The rustle of jackets, the occasional bump of an elbow, followed by a muttered apology. The aircraft was filling, slowly, but it wasn't yet crowded. Gloria leaned her head slightly to one side, not quite dozing, just letting the rhythm of motion calm her. Then it stopped. Not the plane, the rhythm. The flight attendant who'd handed her the water returned, but this time, she was flanked by a man Gloria hadn't seen before. Mid-40s, maybe early 50s, navy blazer over a white shirt, and a tablet clutched tightly in his hand. His eyes didn't quite meet hers. His smile didn't reach past his lips. His voice was polite. Too polite. Ma'am, he said, his tone official but forced. I'm going to need to ask you to step off the plane for just a moment. Gloria blinked once, slowly. Excuse me. I understand this is inconvenient, he continued, lowering his voice. There's been a reassignment situation, and we'd like to speak with you back at the gate. Reassignment. That word again, vague, procedural, impersonal. Like she was a misplaced file instead of a passenger. Am I being removed from this flight? Her tone was even, quiet, not angry, not afraid. He shifted slightly, glancing at the flight attendant beside him. We just need you to step off, ma'am. It's a protocol thing. It won't take long. Passengers nearby looked up. The young man with the earbuds paused his video. The couple stopped talking. A woman 3 rows up turned her head, brows pinched with curiosity. The mood changed, not in a jarring way, but like a room that had gone suddenly colder. Gloria didn't ask again. She didn't protest. She reached for her coat. Her hands were steady, the fabric folded neatly over her arm. She turned to the flight attendant, the one who'd given her water. "Would you mind handing me my bag? I'd rather not bend." There was no malice in her tone, just a quiet firmness that made the woman pause before nodding and bending down to retrieve the satchel. Gloria thanked her and stood. She didn't look around. She didn't ask for help. She stepped into the aisle and walked the same way she'd boarded, calm, composed, self-contained. The man in the blazer didn't speak again until they were back on the jet bridge. He kept tapping at his tablet, mumbling something about seating changes and reassignments and standard procedures. None of it sounded real. None of it sounded like a reason. At the gate, another agent was already typing on her keyboard, fingers moving fast like she'd been trained to smile through panic. "We're just checking on alternate options, ma'am," she said. Gloria didn't respond. She stepped away from the counter and pulled out her phone. She dialed. "Ruben," she said when the call connected. "We may need to review our funding arrangements with Tarmac Air." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Back at the gate, eyes followed her. Not everyone knew what had happened, but they'd seen enough to wonder, enough to ask without asking. A man seated near the window whispered, "That was first class. What the hell just happened?" His wife shook her head. She didn't look like she did anything wrong. She didn't. Another woman, a few rows back, quietly raised her phone and took a picture. Not to post, just in case. Gloria sat down again. Not on the plane this time. Near the window facing the tarmac where planes taxied across the concrete like migrating birds. She opened her notebook, began to write names, times, phrases. Across from her, the agent at the counter kept typing. Behind her, whispers turned into murmurs. In her satchel, her phone vibrated once. A message from Ruben. "Already pulling the numbers. Let me know what you need." Gloria didn't reply. She didn't look up. She just kept writing. Outside, the next plane pulled into the gate. And somewhere inside the system, something had shifted. The agent at the counter was typing like she was trying to outrun the moment. Her nails clicked over the keys in erratic bursts, pausing only when she glanced nervously at the screen. Then back at Gloria, who stood just feet away with the calm of someone who had already lived through storms worse than this. There was no raised voice, no scene, just quiet tension thick enough to slow every conversation within earshot. Gloria Jefferson did not look small in that moment. She stood still, posture sharp, coat folded over one arm, leather satchel hanging by her side. Her presence alone disrupted the routine choreography of the terminal. A child asking for juice stopped mid-sentence. A man mid-scroll on his phone forgot to tap play. Across the waiting area, eyes had begun to follow her not because of what she had done, but because no one could understand why she had been taken off the plane in the first place. "I'd like to know what flight I was reassigned to," Gloria said, her voice as level as the floor beneath them. The young woman behind the desk hesitated. Her expression had shifted from forced friendliness to something closer to unease. I'm checking that now. Just a moment." Gloria nodded once. She wasn't demanding, but there was something in her presence that made the agent's throat tighten. The kind of energy that made a person question who they were speaking to, not based on appearance but on atmosphere. Gloria wasn't the loudest person in the room, but she was the only one in control. "Your system should have that information already," she added after a pause. Not accusatory, just factual. We had a lot of movement with the manifest today. Some delays. Just trying to..." The woman's voice faltered, fingers moving faster on the keyboard now, searching, backspacing, retyping. The man who had escorted Gloria off the plane reappeared behind the counter, still glued to his tablet. He hadn't offered his name, hadn't explained anything beyond that single sterile phrase, a reassignment situation. Now he seemed content to let the younger agent carry the weight of his decision. He scrolled, didn't make eye contact, didn't speak. Gloria turned to face him fully. "Sir, may I ask who approved my removal from Flight 2? He glanced up, startled for a fraction of a second. "I believe that's being handled through our operations team. It's not something I was direct. You walked onto that plane and asked me to leave my seat. I was acting under internal instruction." "From whom?" He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, gesturing vaguely toward the back office. "Someone from corporate flagged an issue with seating assignments. I'm not sure of the specific source." So you were told to remove me, and you followed that instruction without knowing why. It's procedural. She let that sit between them. Across the terminal, a man leaned closer to his wife and whispered, "She's handling this better than I would have." His wife didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on Gloria. A few seats down, a woman pulled out her phone, opened the camera quietly, and began recording not out of spectacle, but instinct. The kind of instinct born from watching too many stories unfold, where dignity wasn't enough to protect someone from erasure. Back at the counter, the younger agent finally spoke again. Softer now. "Miss Jefferson, I'm so sorry. It looks like the next flight to Savannah isn't until 8:40 tomorrow morning. We can arrange accommodations for the night, and I'll make my own arrangements," Gloria interrupted gently. "We really are sorry for I'd still like the name of the supervisor who approved my removal." The woman swallowed. "That would be Brian Linwood. He's one of our senior field ops supervisors, and his direct supervisor. I'd have to check on that." "Please do." The girl nodded and picked up the phone. Gloria didn't press. She stepped aside and took a seat again near the window, placing her coat neatly across her lap. Her notebook came out, along with a slim black pen. She began to write, slowly, precisely, the rhythm of someone documenting facts, not feelings. Date, gate number, flight number, agent descriptions, words spoken, words avoided. Near the vending machines, a teenage girl leaned toward her dad. "Why did they take her off?" Her dad shook his head. "I don't know, but that woman didn't do anything wrong." No one in the terminal knew who she was yet. She looked like someone's grandmother, someone patient, polite, but the kind of woman who folded things with care, who asked the right questions, who didn't flinch when someone tried to push her aside quietly. What they didn't know was that Gloria had spent 5 decades designing systems, governmental, corporate, philanthropic. She had signed off on programs that supported aerospace sustainability, helped draft language that made it into federal aviation reform, and sat on the funding board that currently directed more than $100 million of infrastructure support to domestic carriers, including Tarmac Air. And when she made a phone call, people answered. Back in Baltimore, Reuben Dillard was already opening spreadsheets. He had dropped his travel mug onto the counter and moved straight to the terminal window in his office, where the light hit just enough to remind him what was at stake. His laptop screen reflected Gloria's name in signature blocks, dozens of them. Some for carbon footprint reductions, others for fleet retrofitting, staff training, educational outreach. His fingers flew over keys. Then he saw it. The clause, public conduct violations, could trigger an immediate freeze in funding. Not just future disbursements, but current ones. Gloria didn't need to yell. She had contracts. In Phoenix, Gloria's phone buzzed once. A single text, "I have everything I need, waiting on your word." She didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, she glanced back at the counter where the agent was still on hold, whispering updates into a headset, her fingers tapping a closed folder nervously. Gloria stood. The man in the blazer looked up again, this time with something close to hesitation. He opened his mouth, then thought better of it. She didn't speak to him. Instead, she walked toward the terminal exit with the same measured pace she'd used boarding that flight. Quiet, composed, undeniable, not rushed, not defeated. The silence behind her wasn't passive. It was charged. Dozens of passengers stared, not because of what she'd said, but because of how clearly she had refused to be erased. The airport doors slid open with a sigh. Gloria stepped into the sunlight, adjusted her coat, and made her second call. "Reuben," she said, "I want every document reviewed. Highlight every dollar we've sent them. Flag any clause that gives us leverage." "You're sure?" he asked. "I'm sure." She hung up. A mother with a toddler looked up as Gloria passed. Their eyes met briefly. The woman offered a nod. Gloria nodded back. She didn't need to shout. Didn't need to raise a finger. Because something far more powerful had already started. And by the time they realized who they had tried to dismiss, it would be too late. Gloria Jefferson. Marissa didn't know the name, but something about the way it had been discussed, the impersonal tone, the language meant to sound logistical, while clearly hinting at something else, hit her the wrong way. So she searched the name. What she found made her sit up straighter. Philanthropist. Policy advisor. One of the founding architects of the Mid-Atlantic Sustainable Aviation Fund. Honorary consultant to the Department of Transportation. Featured in at least a dozen industry journals. and head of a private trust managing one of the largest independent aviation-focused climate portfolios in the country. In simple terms, they'd messed with the wrong woman. She didn't go to HR. She didn't go to her manager. She sent a quiet email to the contact listed on the Jefferson Trust's official website, not really expecting anything, just writing what she saw, signing it with hope. Then she went to refill her coffee and tried not to think about it. But someone had read the email. And less than an hour later, Ruben called Gloria. "I've pulled everything," he said. "You're going to want to hear this." Gloria was sitting in a quiet cafe past the security checkpoint, tea untouched. She hadn't said much since exiting the terminal, not even to the driver who offered to help with her bag. She'd walked through every moment of the incident like an air traffic analyst, cataloging every misstep, every phrase, every hesitation. "Tell me." "Over half the money we sent went to programs they haven't even reported follow-ups on. Emissions monitoring, no data, hybrid implementation, one press release, staff development programs, nothing measurable. And here's the kicker clause, 14, Section B. If they breach any portion of our public dignity and conduct agreement, we can place a retroactive freeze, not just stop new funds. We can pull everything pending." Gloria stirred her tea once, then set the spoon down. "That wasn't a breach," she said. "That was arrogance. You want me to draft a statement?" "No." Ruben paused. "You want to give them a chance?" "No," she repeated. "I want to give them time to realize their chances are already gone." Inside Tarmac HQ, the panic had not started yet, but it was about to. Daryl Sumners, a mid-tier communications director, was the first to see the Slack message. "We might have just removed Gloria Jefferson from flight." He blinked, stared, read it again. "Wait, the Gloria Jefferson?" A flood of internal pings followed. External affairs asking for confirmation, legal asking for details, someone from marketing whispering about board relations. The name meant something now. It meant exposure. It meant grants. It meant influence. And no one in that building had the kind of power to undo what had just happened. On the other side of the country, Ruben was already on the phone with a policy contact at a major transportation news outlet. Not to fan the flames, just to confirm the incident. Quietly, carefully, strategically. It wasn't about Gloria being angry. She wasn't. It was about integrity. And she wasn't about to let a corporation bend dignity behind the curtain and expect applause when they threw a recycled apology into the wind. At the same moment, across the hall at Gloria's Foundation in Atlanta, two interns sat quietly on opposite sides of a mahogany conference table, watching as their supervisor quietly retrieved a folder from the archives marked Tarmac Air Disbursement History. The interns didn't ask questions. They'd seen the look on her face, the same one they'd seen in black and white photos from the 80s, back when Gloria had chaired the regional STEM initiative for underserved girls. Focused, undeterred, unshakable. Ruben's phone buzzed again. Another update. Another missed metric from Tarmac. Another empty compliance report. He didn't smile. He didn't curse. He just whispered under his breath, "You picked the wrong damn seat." Back in Phoenix, Gloria exited the cafe. She didn't speak to anyone. She wasn't waiting for headlines. She knew how these things unfolded. Quietly at first, then suddenly, like a pressure valve that holds until one small moment becomes uncontainable. She took out her notebook and flipped back to the page with her notes. Names, titles, language, posture, sequence. She wasn't documenting for revenge. She was documenting for record. The difference was everything. The first message came at 6:42 a.m. Eastern Time. Gloria was sitting by the kitchen window of her brownstone apartment in Atlanta, stirring honey into her tea, when the notification lit her phone. The subject line was simple, about yesterday's incident. The name on the email read Marissa Wynn, a name Gloria didn't recognize, but she read every word. Marissa's tone wasn't panicked, just tense, like someone trying to balance caution and conscience.
"Miss Jefferson,
I work in admin support for the internal ops team at Tarmac Air. I probably shouldn't be reaching out, but I came across an internal thread last night that referenced your removal from Flight 217. I believe it was flagged by someone at corporate, due to what they referred to as front-row optics. Another line mentioned concerns about too many non-premium profiles boarding first. I just thought you should know. I don't expect anything in return. I just couldn't let it sit. No signature block. Just Marissa." Gloria didn't forward the email. She didn't flag it or print it. She called Ruben. By the time he picked up, he was already back at his office, halfway through cross-checking Tarmac's quarterly impact reports against their own self-published sustainability metrics. She used the phrase non-premium profiles, Gloria said, voice even, and referenced a concern about optics in the front row. Ruben went still. "You want me to trace the sender?" he asked. "No," she replied. "I want you to make sure we're clean on every dollar they received. No ambiguity. No loopholes. Already on it." The silence stretched for a moment, before Ruben exhaled sharply. Damn. Gloria didn't respond. She didn't need to. In Des Moines, where Tarmac Air's central operations were housed, the morning began with a spark and erupted into slow, compounding chaos. Marissa sat in the break room staring at her phone, rereading her own email like it might change in front of her. She hadn't told anyone she sent it, but she knew what was coming. Not punishment, not immediately, but surveillance, meetings, memos, the kind of professional discomfort that clings to your shadow long after your manager says no hard feelings. She'd worked there long enough to know how things disappeared. Emails. Mistakes. People. But this time, she wasn't going to be silent about it. Not when she'd read the tone of the internal thread, the casual dehumanization, the corporate safe language used to describe a woman who'd been nothing but compliant. Not when she found out just who Gloria Jefferson really was. Back at headquarters, things started to move. Not in loud explosions, but in quiet, frantic bursts. The head of internal comms, Derek Levis, opened Slack to find 20 unread messages. One caught his eye immediately. "Trent Douglas. Does anyone know if the Gloria Jefferson thing is real? Because if so, we're about to have a very different kind of quarter." That was followed by
Nina.Tanner. "I told y'all this was a bad call. We flagged her for optics and thought she wouldn't notice."
Brenna R. Legal needs clarity. Someone pulled a passenger manifest and escalation history. Within minutes, private channels sprang to life. Thread names like Urgent Reallocation Fallout, Ops Legal PR Triad, and Jefferson Com Strategy. Someone uploaded a PDF with her bio. Someone else uploaded a copy of the Trust's 2023 Impact Report. One line was highlighted in red. Strategic aviation partnerships must maintain demonstrable alignment with the Trust's values of dignity, transparency, and equitable treatment of all passengers, regardless of class, appearance, or perceived value. The word demonstrable echoed in several follow-up messages. It didn't take long for executive leadership to take notice. By 9:15 a.m., 2 board members had requested an emergency alignment call. Someone floated the idea of drafting a personal apology. Another recommended flying a senior VP to Atlanta for a face-to-face. A third asked if they could somehow frame this as a misunderstanding. No one had answers. Only more panic. In the background, a junior IT analyst named Vince quietly changed the privacy permissions on 3 internal threads. Too late. A handful of lower-level staffers, including Marissa, had already seen everything, and someone, though no one knew who, had taken screenshots. Across the country, in Ruben's office, things were moving with precision. He was now on his 3rd call with Gloria's legal consultant, confirming that the Trust's disbursement agreement gave them full authority to issue a freeze, not just on future funding, but to pull pending disbursements mid-cycle if an ethical breach was proven. It didn't even have to be criminal, just systemic. Documented, patterned, and thanks to Marissa's email, they had the start of a pattern. Ruben clicked into the Trust's secure archive and began uploading every document with Tarmac's name on it. There were over 100 files, grants, reports, letters of acknowledgement, digital receipts, meeting transcripts, most signed by Gloria. A few co-signed by aviation regulators, some dated back years. He cross-referenced them with the list Gloria had started in her notebook, the one she'd written sitting quietly near the window at the terminal. Name, Brian Linwood. Time of removal. Gate, B, Flight 2. Status, first class seat. Initial contact, female flight attendant. Secondary contact, male, navy blazer, tablet. No introduction. Language used, reassignment, internal protocol, random seating adjustment. Passenger conduct, compliant, no escalation. It was like a forensic audit, written by someone who'd built audits from scratch. He didn't just feel angry. He felt strategic, focused, and underneath it all, something else was growing. Momentum. By mid-afternoon, A whisper had turned into a wave. Two aviation journalists confirmed they'd heard rumors of a developing story involving a high-profile philanthropist and a commercial carrier. One posted a cryptic tweet. Word is, someone tried to move a queen off the board without checking who owned the table. Gloria didn't comment. She hadn't posted anything. No interviews. No statements. But the silence only made the speculation louder. At Tarmac, their crisis team convened. The VP of Communications ran a draft statement. We regret any discomfort caused to Miss Jefferson and are reviewing our procedures for alignment with our core values of fairness and customer care. The General Counsel raised an eyebrow. That sounds like something we've already said, before the blowback even started, because we didn't know who she was. Someone muttered. Exactly, another snapped. And that's the problem. Someone else asked whether they should try contacting her directly now. One senior executive shook his head. If she hasn't called us by now, she's already moving. And she was. At that moment, Gloria was seated in the sunroom of a family friend's home outside Atlanta, her satchel beside her, the tea now long cold. She was rereading Marissa's email, not because she doubted it, but because she knew what it took to send something like that. The courage, the risk, the understanding that most systems didn't reward whistleblowers. They buried them. She saved the email in a folder labeled support. When Ruben called with the compiled files, she answered on the first ring. We've got it all, he said. Every violation, every clause. You say the word, and we move. I want to write it myself, Gloria replied. And I want it printed. Hand signed. You're sure? Yes, she said, and her voice was almost a whisper now. They weren't expecting the quiet woman in 2A to have teeth. Ruben let out a dry laugh. They are now. And across the airline a storm was gathering. Silent for now, but sharp and calculated, with every piece falling into place not by accident, but by design. By the end of the day, there were 5 separate angles of the same moment. One showed the exact instant Gloria asked, "Am I being removed from this flight?" Another captured the gate area, as she sat down near the window, notebook in hand, writing silently. A third caught the murmured comment of a nearby passenger. That ain't right. The story hadn't gone national. Not yet. But it was circling, picking up speed. At Tarmac Air's PR office, the tension had shifted from internal to visible. Their social team was flooded with tags. Comments on their most recent sustainability post included phrases like, "Was this before or after you kicked the woman funding it off your plane? And tell us again about your equity values." A panicked junior associate tried to respond to a few, but her generic replies only made things worse. One read, "We're looking into the matter and remain committed to customer satisfaction." The replies were swift and merciless. "So you satisfied when you drag black elders off planes now?" She wasn't loud. She wasn't late. Just not what you wanted in first class? Committed to silence, maybe. Meanwhile, Gloria hadn't spoken. Not publicly. Not privately. Not even when Ruben asked if she wanted to draft a preliminary statement. She simply said, "Not yet. Let it circulate. Let them reveal themselves." And they did. The next morning, a mid-tier media outlet published the first real piece. The headline was clean, subtle. Passenger removed from tarmac flight raises questions about airline protocols. The article made no claims, no accusation. It merely laid out the facts. A woman with confirmed first-class status was asked to deboard. No reason was given. The woman in question was Gloria M. Jefferson, a major funder in green aviation development. No quotes. But it was enough. Within 6 hours, the piece was picked up by a business blog with national reach. Their headline cut sharper: "Billion-dollar airline faces backlash after quiet power move by philanthropist." And then, as if the floodgates had been waiting for someone to knock, the story broke wide open. A former colleague of Gloria's, now a political commentator, tweeted, "They really put hands on seat 2A without knowing who sat there. Gloria Jefferson isn't just a passenger, she's infrastructure." The tweet crossed 100K likes by dinner. Ruben, who had spent most of the afternoon fielding press inquiries, sent a 2-line response to every request. "Miss Jefferson is aware of the situation. She will respond in due time. Her priority remains the integrity of her partnerships and the values they reflect." In Savannah, Brielle Jefferson sat at the edge of her bed, scrolling through Instagram, when she saw her great-grandmother's face in a video overlay with the words, "Elder, engineer, game changer." She blinked. "Gigi's on TikTok," she whispered. In Oakland, a sociology professor at a community college paused her lecture to read out a trending quote that had already been shared across multiple platforms. "The most dangerous thing in America is a quiet black woman with money, memory, and motive." She didn't add commentary, just let it hang in the air. Tarmac Air scrambled to prepare a formal statement. They looped in legal, rewrote phrasing 3 times, and finally landed on a single paragraph of corporate regret that was reviewed by 6 executives, and still managed to say nothing. "We regret any confusion that may have occurred during Flight 2N18 boarding, and are working to assess our internal protocols. We are committed to ensuring an inclusive and respectful experience for all passengers." The backlash was immediate. Comment sections filled with screenshots of Marissa Wynn's now leaked email, showing phrases like non-premium profiles and first-row optics. A whistleblower thread on Reddit linked the language to prior incidents of quietly reassigning black passengers in first class when demographic optics clashed with brand image. And then someone found the clause. Clause 14b, buried in the Jefferson Family Trust's public funding policy, outlining conditions for suspension of funds in the event of dignity-based breaches. It was posted on Twitter by a law student, who annotated it in a thread. "If this clause is activated, and from the looks of it, it has been, Tarmac stands to lose upwards of $20 million this quarter alone." Hashtags bloomed. Seat 2A. Fly with dignity. Gloria was right. Morning shows picked it up the next day. One anchor, voice carefully modulated, read out a list of Gloria's known contributions to aviation reform. Another played the video of her standing calmly on the plane and said, "This wasn't just a removal. This was a miscalculation." Still, Gloria didn't speak. She didn't need to. By now the silence had become its own kind of statement, one louder than any press junket or tweet storm. In quiet corners of airports across the country, small shifts occurred. A flight attendant in Denver gently took aside a black elder boarding early and said, "We've made sure you're all set, Miss Taylor." A gate agent in Boston left a post-it in a passenger's boarding pass sleeve. "We saw what they did to Miss Jefferson, not here." The story was no longer just about an incident. It was about what that incident symbolized. Gloria, for her part, spent that day answering exactly one phone call from Clara Beecham, a retired aviation executive now living in Utah. "I've been watching it all," Clara said. "You always knew how to shift gravity without touching the table." "I didn't shift anything," Gloria replied. "They tripped over their own arrogance. And you let them fall. I just didn't catch them." By nightfall, a long-form profile on Gloria began circulating in high-level political newsletters. It included her early work on hybrid flight systems, her tenure on the Transportation Equity Council, and her lesser-known mentorship of women engineers across 3 continents. One paragraph stood out. Gloria Jefferson never built her influence for attention. She built it for outcomes. And when those outcomes demanded action, she moved not with noise, but with purpose. Inside Tarmac Air's boardroom, the conversations were no longer about damage control. They were about survival. Grant withdrawals had already begun. One partner had paused negotiations. A second suspended a co-branded sustainability campaign. Investors were asking questions. Board members were calling for reviews. Someone finally said what everyone had been thinking. "We treated her like a nuisance when she was the reason we were flying." But by then, Gloria was already moving on. Not out of indifference, but because she had never needed to dwell in chaos to be effective. Her eyes were set on what came next. And the world finally was listening. 3 days after the first video of Gloria Jefferson stepping off Flight 2N18 went viral, a quiet digital op-ed appeared on the website of the Salt Lake Tribune. It didn't feature a trending hashtag or a headline designed to provoke outrage, just 6 simple words typed in a serif font older than most Twitter accounts. "You don't know her, but you should." The author was Clara Beecham, retired aerospace executive, former Pentagon advisor, and one of only a handful of women to oversee a federal engineering task force in the late 90s. She hadn't spoken to Gloria in over a decade, but as soon as she saw the footage, she didn't hesitate. She opened her laptop, sipped her chamomile tea, and wrote until her fingers cramped. Clara's op-ed didn't start with the incident. She didn't even mention the airline by name. Instead, she started with a photo, a black and white shot taken in 1987, during the final test phase of a retrofitted Air Force One. Gloria stood at the edge of the tarmac in a trench coat, wind tugging at her bun, a clipboard pressed tightly to her chest. Around her stood 4 men, all in navy suits, all white, all older. She wasn't the most important person in that photo, Clara wrote, until you realized she was the only one who'd read the entire schematic line by line, correction by correction. When the press arrived, they asked the man beside her what the plane could do. He gave them a line about speed. Then Gloria stepped in and told them about efficiency, safety, pressure calibration. Every question she had the real answer. That was the first time Clara had truly seen her. Clara recalled how Gloria had been the only black woman in a room of engineers during an era when people still debated whether women should lead design teams. She hadn't worn flashy suits or spoken to fill the silence. She spoke when it counted, and when she did, people learned to stop talking. Gloria wasn't a figure built by media. She was built by hours, decades, projects that never made it into press kits. Her fingerprints were on classified transportation models, fuel efficiency algorithms, early-stage guidance tech that would later become baseline standards. She'd worked contracts across 3 federal administrations, but no one ever stopped her on the street. She never asked them to. At the Department of Defense, she was brought in as a consultant, not because of who she knew, but because someone finally noticed that the civilian aerospace proposal with 0 redundancy errors and the lowest fuel overload margin had been submitted by a woman who didn't even sign the cover sheet with a title. Gloria M. Jefferson. That was all it had said. No doctor, no Ms., no credentials, just the name. Clara recounted late nights. They'd worked side by side, editing propulsion specs while men 2 pay grades higher were already asleep. She remembered one contract meeting in particular, where a senator's aide had referred to Gloria as secretarial staff, and how Gloria had corrected him, not with venom, but with a detailed correction on his own budget miscalculation. The room had gone dead silent, then shifted just slightly in her direction. She wasn't angry, Clara wrote. She was accurate, and she made sure you knew the difference. But the op-ed didn't stop at boardrooms and blueprints. Clara talked about what Gloria did when no one was watching. The scholarship. Gloria had created 5 under 5 different aliases. One was in the name of a cousin, who never made it past 10th grade. Another under her grandmother's maiden name. All of them targeted toward young women of color in STEM, and none of them listed her as a donor. She didn't want the students to feel like they owed anyone. She didn't want them to carry the weight of someone else's legacy. Just the freedom to build their own. One of those recipients had gone on to lead an environmental tech startup. Another was now at NASA. A third taught science in a middle school in Mississippi. None of them knew her by face, but they all knew her work. Clara ended the piece with a paragraph that stuck with readers long after they'd scrolled past the photo. People are calling her powerful now, viral now, but I knew her when she was neither. I knew her when she was just the most prepared person in every room, who got mistaken for someone else, talked over, assigned the worst projects, and still came back, still showed up, still outthought, outworked, and outlasted the men who discounted her. Gloria didn't become powerful. She just got tired of hiding it. The op-ed spread like fire in quiet spaces. Emails between professors, group texts in grant circles, private Slack channels among non-profit women in tech. Activists in Atlanta passed it to one another between meetings. A junior staffer at the Department of Energy printed it out and taped it to her cubicle wall. And still, Gloria said nothing. She read the piece quietly that afternoon, seated on her porch with her granddaughter Lorraine. She didn't mention it until the last line. She got the details right, Gloria said. Lorraine, a retired school principal herself, looked over. You really set up 5 scholarships without putting your name on them. Gloria nodded. Didn't want them wondering why some stranger wanted to give them money. You're ridiculous, Lorraine muttered. But she was smiling. Just invisible enough to get the job done, Gloria replied. Across the country, networks were still asking for statements. Gloria declined all of them. Ruben handled the inbox with practiced efficiency. One reporter emailed a 6-paragraph pitch requesting a sit-down. Ruben replied with 3 words. She's not interested. It wasn't about the attention. It never had been. But something else was shifting now. Because with the exposure came the reflection, not just on what happened, but on what it meant. Articles began referencing patterns. Instances where older black women were reassigned on flights, without clear explanation. Stories that were never recorded, moments never documented. A retired Delta employee anonymously told a local station, "There were times we were told to adjust optics in the premium rows. Nobody ever used the word race. They didn't have to." Suddenly, Gloria's story wasn't just hers. It was a thread woven into a much larger, long-ignored fabric. And yet, through it all, she remained exactly who she had always been. Measured, composed, deliberate. The world had just caught up. Late that evening, Ruben sent her a message with a link. It was a speech transcript from a 1981 engineering symposium. She had been the keynote speaker, though the archives had misattributed her name for years. He'd found it, corrected it, and uploaded a copy with full credit. She clicked it open. Read the first line. "I'm not here to prove I deserve to be here. I'm here because I already know that. My work speaks. I just need the world to listen better." She closed the laptop. The work hadn't changed. Just the volume. And this time, they were finally listening. Elliot Renshaw, Chief Executive Officer, Tarmac Air Group, Executive Headquarters, Scottsdale, Arizona. She sealed it. No wax. No flourish. Just a quiet, definitive press of the flap. And then she placed it inside a second envelope, marked for overnight courier. She handed it off without ceremony. No one at the local shipping center recognized her. She preferred it that way. But by morning, the letter was on a jet. And by afternoon it had landed on a mahogany desk 3 stories above a glass-walled lobby, filled with succulents and scented air diffusers. Renshaw's assistant opened the envelope, froze, then set it directly on his desk. "It's from Gloria Jefferson," she said, then walked out and closed the door behind her. Renshaw read it once. His jaw tensed. He read it again. And then he stopped pretending this was a small situation. The letter was 1 page long. "Dear Mr. Renshaw, following recent developments regarding my removal from Flight 2118 on April 11, 2025, I have reviewed the terms of the Jefferson Family Trust's ongoing funding partnership with Tarmac Air Group, as outlined in the funding agreement established in 2018 and reaffirmed through quarterly audits. The trust maintains a commitment to supporting aviation innovation with partners who demonstrate transparency, equity, and immeasurable dedication to human dignity. In light of actions that reflect a failure to uphold those principles, and after a review of internal communications now brought to our attention, I am formally notifying your office that effective immediately, the Jefferson Family Trust is suspending all current and future funding to Tarmac Air Group. This suspension includes pending grants, retroactive disbursements, and upcoming program renewals. Our compliance division will follow up with a full audit request within 10 business days. I have no further comment at this time. Respectfully, Gloria M. Jefferson, Founder and Chair, the Jefferson Family Trust. There was no dramatic language. No moral lecture. Just a scalpel. Renshaw didn't speak for a full 60 seconds. Then he reached for his office phone and called legal. He didn't ask how bad it was. He already knew. In the floor below, word spread through a Slack thread that hadn't even existed 2 days earlier. Gloria response. Someone posted. "It's real. She sent the letter. We're done." Another followed up. 18 mailers in Q3 tied to those programs alone. Then came the ripple. Calls to the VP of Partnerships. To the CFO. The head of Strategic Innovation. Panic threaded its way across every team that had ever pitched green alignment as a brand pillar. One of the interns, fresh out of grad school, whispered to his manager, "Didn't she fund the hybrid fleet pilot?" The manager just nodded and started drafting a memo he already knew wouldn't fix anything. Renshaw, meanwhile, was on his 3rd call to the board within 2 hours. "This is unprecedented," he told them. But it wasn't. Not really. It was just rare that someone with this much influence used it in the open. In another office, Daryl Sumners, the same comms director, who had watched the first Slack messages unravel the situation, put his head in his hands. "They always think the quiet ones won't act," he muttered to no one. By evening, the story had hit financial media. Not gossip columns. Not trending lists. Real outlets. Philanthropic trust halts $100 million aviation funding over passenger misconduct. The article included no quotes from Gloria, just a screenshot of the letterhead, the date, and a 1-line summary from Ruben. The trust believes in accountability over apology. On cable news, analysts were cautious with their language. "This could set a precedent," one said. A philanthropist with control over key innovation dollars signaling that behavior matters, not just bottom-line metrics. A second panelist leaned forward. "It's not just that she walked away. It's that she walked away holding the receipts." And all the while, Gloria remained still. She spent the afternoon helping her neighbor's grandson finish his math homework. She didn't bring up the letter. When asked about her week, She just smiled and said, "Busy." No trace of pride, no trace of vengeance. Just the quiet satisfaction of someone who did what needed to be done. Back in Scottsdale, Tarmac's internal comms team drafted a second version of their response. This one dropped the word confusion. Added phrases like deep regret, reaffirming values, and learning opportunity. But none of it mattered. Because the damage wasn't only public, it was structural. Their credibility had always been borrowed, and Gloria had just called in the loan. At one point, someone suggested offering to meet with her privately. "Do you really think she wants a meeting now?" one director asked. No one answered, because everyone in that room already knew the truth. Gloria hadn't acted out of emotion. She had waited, measured, calculated. She gave them time. She gave them silence. And they spent it on PR. So when the strike came, it wasn't loud. It was final. She didn't yell. She didn't demand. She wrote a letter. And the whole system shook. In the days after Gloria Jefferson's letter arrived on Elliot Renshaw's desk, something strange began to happen. Not on camera, not in headlines, but in spaces too small for a press release. At airports across the country, people who had watched the world look away from injustice their whole careers suddenly felt the urge to speak. Not shout, not protest, just stand up in ways that, until now, hadn't seemed safe. A gate agent in Milwaukee, veteran of 20 years, quietly left a note in the hands of an older black woman boarding early on a rainy Tuesday morning. The note read, "I saw what they did to Ms. Jefferson. That won't happen here. No signature, no badge number, just a message passed like a prayer." In Fresno, a retired baggage handler named Tom Gardner, who still met his old crew for breakfast every Wednesday, raised his coffee cup and said, "That could have been my sister." He meant it. They'd both worked terminals in the 80s. Back when it wasn't uncommon to see women like Gloria pushed to the back of the line, called by the wrong name, given the seat no one wanted. Back then, no one had cameras. No one believed you if you told the story later. Now the stories were pouring in. Flight attendants posted anonymously in forums about what they'd seen. "There's always been a list," one wrote. Unwritten, but understood. The kind of passengers flagged not because of behavior but because someone didn't like how they looked sitting in row 1. Another chimed in, "We're trained to de-escalate. But sometimes we're also trained to disappear the problem before it becomes one." That's what they thought she was. But Gloria had never been a problem. She'd simply decided to stop disappearing. Inside Tarmac Air, something else was shifting. Staff who had never spoken in meetings found their voices. One junior analyst raised her hand in a Monday metrics call and asked, "Do we have demographic data for seat reassignment overrides?" The room fell quiet. Someone promised to circle back. In the HR office, a coordinator named Lynn printed out Gloria's letter and taped it above her desk. It wasn't defiance. It was reminder of the kind of work she thought she was signing up for when she joined the company. The kind of work that meant something. And then there was Marissa Wynn. She hadn't expected anyone to reply to her email. She certainly hadn't expected to be mentioned in closed-door meetings, or flagged by legal. But when Ruben called her personally, his voice calm and grateful, she felt something lift. Not fear validation. "I just didn't want it to disappear," she'd said to him. "It won't," he replied, "because you didn't let it." She never heard from Gloria directly. She didn't need to. The letter was enough. The movement that followed, quiet, growing, inevitable, was enough. In the midst of all this, Gloria boarded another plane. No headlines, no cameras. She used a different airline this time, one she'd flown with since the early 2000s. The staff recognized her from the news, but said nothing beyond polite greetings. She didn't carry herself like a celebrity. She carried herself like she always had, with intention, with poise, with quiet authority. She landed in Savannah just after sunset. Brielle was waiting with a glittery cardboard sign that said "Welcome Gigi" in marker and rhinestones. She ran barefoot through the terminal, scarf tied around her head, eyes shining. Gloria opened her arms, and for the first time in days, her face softened completely. "You didn't tell me you were famous," Brielle said through a laugh. "I'm not," Gloria replied, smoothing the girl's shoulders. "I'm just tired of being quiet." At home, Lorraine had already made gumbo. The cornbread was cooling on the stove. The television was off. The phones were away. And the only thing that mattered in that moment was the sound of 3 generations sitting down to eat. No statements, no Just the click of spoons on ceramic bowls, and the quiet pride in Lorraine's eyes as she said, "They had the nerve to touch you." "It wasn't personal," Gloria said. Lorraine raised an eyebrow. "Didn't feel impersonal. They didn't know who I was. That's the problem," Lorraine muttered. "They didn't care." Gloria didn't argue. She just reached for her tea. Later that night, Gloria stepped onto the back porch. The air was soft with humidity. Crickets chirped like they'd been waiting for her return. She looked up at the stars and thought of every woman who had walked away from injustice in silence because they had no choice. No microphone, no platform, no proof. She had carried all of them on flight, even if no one else could see it. In Washington, a small nonprofit that supported black women in aviation released a public statement titled, "We Fly Because She Stayed Seated First." It included the names of 10 women who'd been quietly removed from premium seats over the last 5 years. None had gone viral, but now they were being remembered. At Howard University, students in the Policy Studies department printed out Gloria's letter and analyzed it in a seminar about dignified disruption. The professor began class with a question: what does accountability look like when it wears a silk blouse and signs in blue ink? Across the country, small acts multiplied. A local airline worker in Charleston quietly slipped a care packet into the bag of an older black woman traveling alone. It included water, tissues, a snack, and a note. "We see you. We're watching differently now." A teacher in Minneapolis assigned her students to write about a moment when silence meant strength. More than half chose Gloria. And yet, Gloria wasn't watching any of this unfold. She was sitting on the living room floor with Brielle, watching the girl unpack her robotics kit for the city award ceremony. The tiny wheeled machine she'd built trundled across the rug and bumped gently into the leg of the coffee table before backing up and trying again. "It senses where not to go," Brielle explained proudly. "Smart girl," Gloria said, watching. "She's just trying to figure out the right path." Gloria nodded. "Aren't we all?" When Ruben called her the next morning to brief her on new developments, another airline revising its boarding policy, a second foundation requesting to model their grant language after hers, she listened, thanked him, then returned to the porch where her coffee was still warm. "I said what I needed to say," she told him. "The rest is just airwaves." He didn't argue. He just said, "The airwaves are different now." And he was right. Because this was never about viral fame. It was about the ones who watched quietly, wondering if anyone would ever believe them. And now, they knew someone did. The Macon Civic Center hadn't changed much since 1974. The chairs were newer, the lights softer, and the curtains less faded. But the bones were still the same. Wide wooden stage, modest sound system, Georgia state flag hanging beside a plain podium. Back then Gloria had stood behind that same podium, with trembling hands and a heart full of equations, giving a lecture on satellite telemetry to a crowd that barely looked up. Now, 51 years later, the hall was full, and every head in the audience was turned her way before she even said a word. She'd said no twice before agreeing to speak. Ruben had asked gently. A few nonprofits had begged. A senator's office had offered to fly her to D.C. "If I'm going to say anything," she finally told Ruben, "I'll say it here, where I started, where I first proved to myself that I belonged in rooms that didn't expect me." There were no velvet ropes, no national banners, just folding chairs filled with students, parents, local journalists, and a few faces Gloria remembered from long ago. No script, no handlers, just one mic, and her She stepped up to the podium slowly, adjusting her reading glasses once. Her suit was slate gray, her blouse a deep navy. No jewelry except for her slim gold band, and the same Timex she'd worn the day they took her off. That plane. She didn't begin with pleasantries. "I didn't come here to get revenge," she said, her voice low and clear. "I came here to remind us what we've forgotten." The room went still. "I was asked to leave a flight, without explanation, with language soft enough to sound polite, but hollow enough to sting. I complied. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I made a phone call. And that phone call reminded a billion-dollar company that dignity has a memory." That line settled over the room like dust in sunlight. Phones rose quietly. Cameras started rolling. Too often, we make excuses for institutions that mistreat people. We say they didn't mean it. We call it a mistake. We let them hire a consultant and move on. But what if she leaned in, slightly? What if every single quiet dismissal meant something? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Not of confusion, but agreement. What if we stopped looking for outrage and started listening to the ones who never raised their voices in the first place? She paused, not for dramatic effect, but to breathe, to let her words land without being drowned in applause. I wasn't the first person this happened to, and I won't be the last. But maybe now, the next time a gate agent sees an older black woman in first class, she'll hesitate before assuming she doesn't belong there. The silence in the room wasn't uncomfortable. It was reverent. Gloria didn't bring a slideshow. She didn't cite statistics. She didn't need to. Her presence was the evidence. Her voice, the exhibit. Some people have called this a power play, she continued. But power isn't the ability to punish. It's the ability to choose how you respond when you're disrespected. I didn't want anyone fired. I didn't want public apologies. I wanted accountability. She looked out into the audience, at the girl in the second row scribbling notes, at the older man seated with arms crossed tightly over his chest, at the young black woman near the aisle nodding softly to herself. I'm 76 years old, Gloria said, and I've been proving myself to people who never bothered to learn my name since I was 23. But I'm done proving. I know who I am. The question is, do you? One of the reporters from Atlanta later wrote that it was the first speech they'd ever covered where they didn't want to ask a single follow-up. Not because there weren't questions, but because every answer had already been given between the lines. Gloria stepped back from the mic slowly. She didn't wave. She didn't wait for applause. She gave a small nod, measured final, and walked off the stage to the sound of silence, stretching into clarity. Later that night, clips of the speech circulated online. The key line, "Dignity has a memory," was quoted by activists, pastors, high school teachers, and corporate trainers. A university in Maryland made it the theme of its next ethics seminar. A law professor in Texas called it the most important public reckoning wrapped in restraint I've ever witnessed. But Gloria wasn't watching the coverage. She was on the road back to Savannah, riding in the passenger seat, while Lorraine drove, and Brielle sat in the back, humming under her breath. "Gigi," Brielle said, after a while, "you didn't even look nervous." Gloria smiled faintly, eyes still on the passing trees. "That wasn't nerves. That was remembering." "Remembering what?" "That this country changes in two ways," she said. "Suddenly and slowly. You speak when you can, and you stand when you must." She didn't say anything more. She didn't need to. In Macon, the Civic Center janitor found a folded note tucked beneath one of the chairs. It read, "I didn't think someone like me belonged here until today. Thank you for standing there so I could sit here." He left the note on the dressing room mirror before locking up. Elsewhere, a group of aviation executives who had been watching closely sat in a glass conference room in Denver and began rewriting their employee conduct policies. No press release, no big speech, just acknowledgement, overdue and necessary. And in living rooms across the country, families who had never heard of Gloria Jefferson before that week now sat around dinner tables quoting her line like scripture. Dignity has a memory. But for Gloria, the moment was already behind her. She had never needed a microphone to be powerful. She had never waited for applause to validate her purpose. She had stood in the place where she once whispered. And this time, the world had leaned in. Not because she shouted, but because she finally chose to speak. By the end of the week, "Dignity has a memory" had taken on a life of its own. The quote appeared in classrooms, church bulletins, board meetings, and browser tabs. It was painted on protest signs and printed on the side of coffee mugs. It was stenciled in chalk outside university libraries. One muralist in Detroit even began sketching it across the side of a brick community center, right below a hand-painted portrait of Gloria Jefferson, eyes steady, expression unbothered. The country hadn't just heard her speech, they had absorbed it. But the most remarkable part wasn't the noise. It was the change happening underneath it. In offices where diversity initiatives had once been pushed to the end of the quarter, managers now opened Monday meetings with a new kind of language. How are we making room for those we've historically overlooked? What does accountability look like at the gate, not just the boardroom? Why do our departments quietly revised employee conduct guidelines, not in reaction to scandal, but in acknowledgement of legacy? Companies that had used the word inclusion, like wallpaper, were now re-evaluating the actual foundation. Tarmac Air, still weathering financial backlash, released a second, far more direct statement. This time, they named Gloria. They apologized without conditions. They confirmed internal investigations. But it was too late to fix what had already broken. Several corporate partners had suspended joint sustainability campaigns. An academic partnership had quietly withdrawn. Public trust had evaporated, not because of the removal itself, but because of what it revealed. Still, it wasn't just about tarmac anymore. Other airlines took notice. By the second week, 3 major carriers initiated full reviews of first-class boarding practices. One even added a new line to its crew training manual. Discreet removal is not neutral. It is a message, and it will be heard. A retired flight operations officer, who had spent 40 years behind the scenes in aviation, wrote in an industry blog, "This was never about one flight. It was about how many people we told, without telling, that their presence made us uncomfortable." Meanwhile, airline employees, especially women of color, started sharing their stories. Not for fame, not for virality, but because Gloria's silence had given permission for others to speak. A former gate supervisor in Austin posted, "I was told to pull a black passenger off the upgrade list once because the front row's already full. I didn't push back. I still think about her. I hope she knows I saw her." Her post gained over 50,000 shares. In Atlanta, a small group of baggage handlers created a tradition. They began slipping handwritten cards into carry-ons of older women traveling alone. The messages were simple: "You are seen," or "This space was always yours." Some passengers cried when they found them, some tucked them into wallets. Some just smiled quietly and said nothing, holding the paper like a gift they weren't sure they deserved. The ripple spread further than transportation. In a university ethics class in Seattle, Gloria's speech became required reading. In Minneapolis, a public school librarian built an entire Black History Month display around engineers, scientists, and overlooked female pioneers in aviation. At the bottom of the display was a quote in bold black type: "Power doesn't always speak loudly, but when it speaks clearly, everything changes." Political circles began to respond too. During a transportation oversight hearing, a senator from Oregon referenced the airline incident without naming the company or the woman involved. He simply said, "When billion-dollar industries forget the people they're supposed to serve, it takes just one voice, clear, measured, and informed, to remind them. And sometimes that voice isn't yelling. It's asking a question: why am I being removed?" The hearing room fell still. Everyone knew who he was talking about, even among those who didn't know her face. Gloria Jefferson had become a symbol of something rare in public discourse: quiet consequence. Her story hadn't come from a protest. It wasn't a scandal born of outrage. It had been a procedural injustice. And that's what made it so powerful, because if it could happen to her, it had already happened to countless others. The only difference was, this time, the system picked the wrong woman. But while institutions scrambled to learn from her, Gloria was back in Savannah. No interviews, no op-eds, just routine. She helped Brielle prep for her city hall ceremony. She picked tomatoes from the backyard garden with Lorraine. She sat on the porch and responded to a handful of handwritten letters, sent by people she'd never met: retired teachers, young engineers, a 13-year-old girl in Detroit, who'd written, "I didn't know people like you existed. Now I want to be you." Gloria wrote back. She always signed with care. Across the country, small acts of kindness began to multiply. Not performative, not coordinated, just people seeing people again. A woman in Chicago helped an elderly man to his seat on the bus and whispered, "You don't have to explain yourself." A TSA agent in Miami let a passenger know, "We've updated our escalation policy because of someone like you." A startup in North Carolina started an internal monthly award called Seat 2A, given to employees who displayed quiet strength and ethical leadership. No headlines covered that part, but that was the part that mattered. At the Jefferson Family Trust, Rubin found himself fielding requests from organizations across industries, universities, nonprofits, municipalities, all asking for permission to model Gloria's letter. Not to copy it, just to understand its tone, its power, its restraint. They didn't want noise, they wanted structure. "Everyone thinks they want a viral moment," Rubin said during a video call. "But what they actually need is a plan, a precedent, a blueprint." Gloria had given them that, without raising her voice, without asking for a spotlight, just by knowing where to aim her silence. And still, she didn't see herself as a movement. When Brielle asked her what she thought about being called a national figure, Gloria just chuckled softly and said, "I've been a national figure since 1983. They just didn't notice. But this time, they had. And from airport lounges to city chambers, from classrooms to cargo bays, the shift was real. Because once dignity becomes visible, it's impossible to ignore. And once silence is recognized as a strategy, not surrender, it changes the terms of engagement forever. So when the cultural moment passed from headlines into habits, from sound bites into systems, people didn't stop quoting her. They just started living like she'd already said enough. The morning light poured through the kitchen blinds, in warm streaks, painting the table in slanted gold. Gloria sat with both hands wrapped around her coffee mug, her fingers curled gently around the warmth, her posture straight despite the quiet ache of her joints. She was dressed simply, a soft cardigan over a cotton blouse, slacks pressed like always. Across from her, Brielle poured 2 glasses of orange juice, her movements slower than usual, like she was thinking through something she hadn't figured out how to ask yet. You know, Brielle said, sliding the glass across the table. They're still talking about you online. Gloria raised her eyebrows slightly, but didn't look up. Let them, she replied. They'll stop when someone else does something louder. Brielle watched her for a second. But don't you care about how big this got? I care about you. I care about the kind of world you grow up in. Gloria finally met her eyes. That's bigger than a news cycle. There was silence then. Not awkward, not heavy, just full of something unspoken and understood, the kind of quiet you don't try to fill. Brielle looked down at her juice. Were you scared? She asked softly. When they told you to leave the plane. Gloria didn't answer right away. She sipped her coffee, exhaled, and looked out the window. Not scared, she said after a while. Just tired. Tired? Gloria nodded. Tired of how quickly people forget your worth when they don't recognize your face. You get to a certain age, and you think maybe you've earned your place, and then someone reminds you, quietly, efficiently, that you're still expected to prove yourself. Brielle's brow furrowed. But you didn't yell. You didn't cry. You just made that one call. That's the thing about power, Gloria said softly. Real power doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to know when to speak. The words landed somewhere between them, and didn't move. Brielle nodded slowly, her eyes now distant, as if storing the moment like a lesson she'd revisit one day, when it was her turn to be tired, her turn to speak. Later that day, Gloria went for a walk through the neighborhood park. The air was thick with spring, the scent of honeysuckle tangled in the breeze. Children ran in uneven bursts, chasing each other through patches of grass. Joggers passed, earbuds in. A woman pushing a stroller gave Gloria a polite smile and moved on. She found an empty bench near the pond, sat down slowly, and closed her eyes. She wasn't hiding. She was simply being, and after everything, that felt like its own kind of resistance. A few minutes passed before someone approached. A teenage boy, maybe 15, hesitated just a few feet away. He looked unsure, like he'd rehearsed something in his head, and wasn't sure if it still made sense out loud. "Excuse me," he said, voice cautious. "Are you Miss Jefferson?" Gloria opened her eyes. "Yes, I am." He nodded quickly. "My mom told me about you. Said you taught a whole country how to act right without yelling once." Gloria smiled. Despairly. "Tell your mother I appreciate her words." The boy shifted his weight. If I ever see someone getting treated wrong like that, what should I do?" She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "You don't wait to be asked. You don't need to shout. You just stand beside them. That's all it takes sometimes." He nodded, murmured a thank you, and walked off more certain than he'd been a moment ago. Back home, Gloria sat on the porch as the sun began to sink. The air turned cooler, and the sound of cicadas drifted in from the trees. She held a folded photo in her hands, the same one she'd carried in her wallet for years. Brielle standing next to her robotics project, smiling like she owned the world. The corners of the photo were soft now, the colors slightly faded. She thought of the women who had come before her. Women who had swallowed insults whole and walked away without speaking. Women who had sat in the backs of buses and classrooms and offices, unnoticed. Women who had known the cost of dignity and paid it in full, only to be asked to pay again. She thought of her mother, who'd worked 2 jobs and still found time to sew Gloria's first science fair dress. Of her grandmother, who read every newspaper she could find even when none of them printed stories about people who looked like her. Of the teacher who let her use the lab after hours because she saw something in Gloria that the boys in her class ignored. None of those women had gone viral, but she carried them all. And when she stood in seat 2A, calmly collecting her bag. She wasn't alone. She brought with her the ones who never got to speak, who never had a phone number that made a system pause, who were told gently, efficiently that they didn't belong. She didn't write a letter for revenge. She didn't give a speech for attention. She did it because somewhere out there, a girl like Brielle would be sitting in a room someday, where someone looked at her and saw inconvenience instead of brilliance. And when that happened, Gloria wanted the world to hesitate. Even just a little. Because once hesitation takes root, so does change. Later that evening, Lorraine joined her on the porch with a bowl of sliced peaches and a look of quiet satisfaction. You know, there's a school in Alabama that's naming a robotics lab after you, Lorraine said. Gloria gave a soft laugh. They should name it after Brielle. She said no. Said she wants her own name on something she builds herself. Gloria smiled wider. Smart girl. They sat in silence for a while. The stars began to appear, one by one. You ever think about how far it went? Lorraine asked. All this? The press, the speeches, the ripple? I didn't expect any of it, Gloria said. But I'm not surprised. Dignity doesn't die, it just waits. Lorraine nodded. You gave it a reason to speak. I just gave it a seat. Brielle came out a few minutes later, curling into the chair beside her great-grandmother. Do you think people will forget? She asked softly. Some will, Gloria said. But not all. Not the ones who matter. And what if it happens again? Gloria took a slow breath. Then someone else will speak. Maybe not like I did. Maybe louder. Maybe sooner. But they would. The porch light flicked on. The stars above were steady. And beneath the quiet, something in the world had already shifted.